The Savannah air in late June was a living, breathing entity, thick with the cloying sweetness of blooming magnolias battling the briny, decaying tang that perpetually clung to the old waterfront district. It was a humidity that didn't just sit on your skin, it insinuated itself, a second, unwelcome garment. Michael's jaw was a rigid, unyielding knot, the cords in his neck standing out like taut ropes as his grip on the steering wheel of his aging Ford pickup tightened. The digital breadcrumbs he'd been desperately following, the increasingly erratic and finally silent pings from Sarah's phone, had led him to this desolate, forgotten corner of the city. The only sounds were the mournful, almost accusatory cries of unseen gulls circling overhead and the distant, rhythmic clang of metal from the nearby shipyard. Sarah. His Sarah. The woman whose unrestrained laughter was the brightest, most cherished sound in his world, whose casual touch still had the power to ignite a slow burn beneath his skin after 3 years of shared dreams and whispered intimacies. Lately, however, that incandescent light had been steadily, inexorably dimming, replaced by an unsettling chiaroscuro of furtive glances and hastily extinguished secrets. Her late study sessions for the crucial nursing exams that would finally launch her career at St. Jude's Hospital had stretched into the small hours of the morning, her explanations becoming increasingly vague, almost rehearsed. Just a particularly demanding case study group, honey, she'd offer, her gaze skittering away from his probing stare, a new, almost brittle tension perpetually coiled in the set of her usually relaxed shoulders. Michael, immersed in the demanding but ultimately rewarding work of his burgeoning custom carpentry business, finally gaining the traction he'd poured his heart and soul into, had desperately tried to be understanding, to offer unwavering support for her demanding academic pursuits. He knew how fiercely Sarah clung to her lifelong ambition of becoming a pediatric nurse, how much joy she derived from caring for the vulnerable children at the hospital. But the accumulation of small, discordant notes had begun to orchestrate a symphony of unease within him, a creeping dread that no amount of rationalization could entirely dispel. The hushed, almost conspiratorial phone calls she'd take in the hallway, her thumb dancing with a feverish, secretive intensity across the screen, the abrupt way she'd terminate the conversation if he happened to enter the room unexpectedly. Each instance was a tiny pinprick in the balloon of his trust. Then there was the undeniably expensive silver bracelet that had materialized on her slender wrist, an intricate, delicate piece that was a stark departure from her usual collection of simple, handcrafted jewelry. Oh, this, she'd offered by way of explanation a little too quickly, her voice a shade too bright, a telltale blush creeping up the delicate curve of her neck. It was a thank you gift from Mrs. Henderson at the hospital. Michael knew Mrs. Henderson. A sweet, if somewhat eccentric, elderly woman who dedicated her retirement to knitting brightly colored baby blankets for the newborns, hardly the type to be gifting designer jewelry. He'd swallowed his rising suspicion, forcing himself to attribute his growing unease to his own inherent insecurities, a lifelong battle with the fear of losing something precious. He loved Sarah with a fierce, unwavering intensity, had painstakingly woven a future in his mind's eye, a tapestry filled with her infectious energy and boundless optimism. He didn't want to be the stereotypical jealous, controlling boyfriend, suffocating the very spark that had drawn him to her in the first place. Tony, his best friend since the scraped-knee days of elementary school, a perpetually charming bartender whose easygoing nature had always served as a reliable balm to Michael's more introspective anxieties, had become an increasingly frequent, almost ubiquitous presence in their lives. Just checking in on you guys, he'd announce, a six-pack of some obscure craft beer swinging from his hand, his perpetually affable smile radiating an almost unsettling level of concern. He and Sarah seemed to have forged a particularly strong bond over their shared experiences of stress and exhaustion, her demanding hospital shifts mirroring his late, often chaotic nights at the dimly lit bar downtown. Michael had initially been genuinely pleased that they were connecting, his two most cherished people finding a measure of solace and understanding in each other's company. He'd often returned to their small, slightly cluttered apartment to find them engrossed in hushed, intense conversations at the worn kitchen table, Sarah's unrestrained laughter occasionally echoing through the rooms, a sound that usually filled him with immense joy but lately carried a faint, unfamiliar echo, a subtle resonance that seemed to exclude him. He'd even caught their glances a few times, fleeting moments of intense, almost conspiratorial connection that vanished the instant his presence was acknowledged. Tony's reassurances, his overly hearty pats on Michael's back, the almost theatrical pronouncements of their enduring friendship now felt cloying, rehearsed, utterly insincere. Sarah's a real gem, Mike. You're a damn lucky man, he'd declare, his eyes lingering on Sarah for a fraction of a second too long, a possessive glint hidden just beneath the surface of his friendly gaze. One crisp Saturday morning, Michael, eager to recapture some of the lost intimacy, had meticulously planned a surprise picnic at Forsyth Park, Sarah's beloved oasis of green in the heart of the city. He carefully packed her favorite artisanal sandwiches, a bottle of their favorite chilled Riesling, and even dusted off the old vinyl record player they'd unearthed at a dusty antique store on River Street. But Sarah had called that morning, her voice tight with a strained apology that sounded suspiciously like a well-rehearsed excuse. "Michael, honey, I am so incredibly sorry, but Mrs. Henderson, she had a really bad fall last night. They're completely swamped at the hospital, they need all hands on deck." The sharp pang of disappointment had been immediate and visceral, but he'd forced a smile into his voice, telling her to do what she needed to do, masking the growing unease that coiled in his stomach like a cold serpent. Later that afternoon, aimlessly driving through the historic district, his gaze had drifted towards Tony's dimly lit bar, and he'd distinctly seen Tony's familiar Chevy Blazer parked out front. And through the hazy window, a fleeting glimpse of vibrant red hair. He dismissed it instantly, chalking it up to the small-town familiarity of Savannah. Red hair wasn't exactly a rare commodity. But the fleeting image had stubbornly lodged itself in his memory, a tiny, insidious seed of doubt beginning to sprout and take root in the fertile ground of his growing suspicions. The scene unfolding before him now, here in the desolate silence of the docks, the raw, undeniable reality of what he'd just witnessed, was like a brutal, physical uprooting, tearing away the carefully cultivated normalcy of his life, exposing the festering rot that had been growing beneath the surface, poisoning everything he held dear. "It's not what it looks like." Sarah's desperate, choked plea hung in the thick, humid air, a fragile shield against the undeniable reality of the scene. Her usually vibrant green eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored Michael's own, tears already blurring her mascara into dark, smudged trails that snaked down her pale cheeks. Tony, the ever-charming, perpetually grinning Tony, stood frozen, his usual easy swagger completely evaporated, replaced by a stark, unsettling blend of guilt and something else that flickered beneath the surface, a raw, almost animalistic defensiveness. "Mike, just let me explain," he stammered, taking a hesitant, almost involuntary step forward, his hands held out in a placating gesture that rang hollow in the oppressive silence. But Michael's ears were roaring, the blood pounding in his temples like a frantic drumbeat. "Explain what, exactly?" Explain the tangled limbs, the desperate, hungry kiss, the raw, visceral betrayal that had just landed a brutal, unexpected punch to his gut, leaving him gasping for air in the suffocating humidity? "Explain what, Sarah?" His voice was low, guttural, a dangerous rumble he barely recognized as his own, laced with a pain that threatened to shatter him. "Explain why my fiancée, the woman I'm supposed to marry, is all over my best friend, my damn brother in all but blood, in his grimy truck like some tawdry cliché?" A violent tremor ran through Sarah's slender frame, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. It just happened, Michael. It was a moment of weakness. The pressure from the hospital, everything just got overwhelming. Her voice trailed off, thin and unconvincing, the flimsy excuse hanging in the air like a tattered flag of surrender. Tony shifted his weight uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Michael and Sarah, a trapped animal caught in the headlights. "Look, man, it's complicated, okay? You wouldn't understand." "Complicated?" Michael's laughter was sharp, humorless, bordering on hysterical. "Complicated? You two think you can just brazenly betray me, stab me in the back like this, and dismiss it as complicated?" He took a slow, deliberate step closer, his fists clenching so tightly his nails bit into the soft flesh of his palms. Every instinct screamed for him to lash out, to feel the satisfying, brutal crunch of bone against his knuckles, to unleash the white-hot fury that was threatening to consume him. But beneath the initial, blinding shock, a cold, calculating anger was beginning to simmer, a dangerous undercurrent that urged him to observe, to understand, before he acted. He saw the raw, naked fear in Sarah's usually confident eyes, the undeniable guilt etched on Tony's face. But he also saw something else, a fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of something shared between them, a silent, unspoken understanding that excluded him, that painted him as the outsider in his own life. "There's more to this than just a moment of weakness, isn't there?" Michael's voice was dangerously quiet, the calm before a potential storm. Sarah's gaze flickered nervously towards Tony, a silent, desperate communication passing between them, a plea for guidance, for a shared lie. Tony hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat, then let out a heavy, defeated sigh. "Yeah, Mike, yeah, there's more." He ran a hand through his already disheveled dark hair, the gesture uncharacteristically agitated. We've been seeing each other for a while now. Months. The word hung in the thick, humid air like a toxic cloud, each syllable a fresh wave of nausea washing over Michael. Months of stolen glances, whispered secrets, clandestine meetings, lies meticulously woven into the very fabric of their intertwined lives, a tapestry of deceit that had been carefully constructed behind his unsuspecting back. Michael's chest ached with a profound, agonizing pain that went far beyond simple heartbreak. It was a deep, visceral violation, a brutal, personal assault on his trust, his loyalty, everything he held sacred. And all those late nights, Sarah? The study sessions that stretched until dawn? The extra shifts volunteering at the hospital. His voice dripped with a venomous sarcasm he didn't know he possessed. Sarah's face crumpled, her carefully applied makeup now a smeared mess. I lied, Michael. I'm so sorry. Tony stepped forward again, his usual easy charm replaced by a strained defensiveness. Look, man, you weren't exactly present, you know? Sarah needed someone who understood her, someone who appreciated her for who she really is. The sheer audacity of his words stole Michael's breath, leaving him momentarily speechless with disbelief and a surging wave of incandescent rage. He? Not appreciating Sarah? He dedicated the last 3 years of his life to building a future with her, cherishing her dreams as his own, supporting her every ambition with unwavering devotion. Appreciated her? Michael repeated, his voice rising, the carefully constructed calm beginning to shatter. You think you appreciate her more than I do? You think sneaking around behind my back, betraying the man who considered you his brother, is your twisted definition of appreciation? He looked from Sarah's tear-streaked, guilt-ridden face to Tony's increasingly defiant stance, and a sickening, horrifying realization washed over him, colder and more profound than the initial shock. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by alcohol or loneliness. This was something deeper, something calculated, something planned. What else? Michael demanded, his eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. What else have you two been up to while I've been busting my ass to build a life for us? Sarah and Tony exchanged another long, uneasy glance, a silent, desperate plea for a unified alibi. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken secrets, the humid night suddenly feeling suffocating, oppressive. Michael knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty that resonated deep within his bones, that the ugly, heartbreaking betrayal he'd just stumbled upon was merely the visible tip of a vast, treacherous iceberg, and the darkness beneath was far more profound and dangerous than he could possibly imagine. A glacial resolve began to spread through Michael, a cold, hard frost creeping over the raw, exposed nerve endings of his fury and heartbreak. He wouldn't grant them the visceral satisfaction of his unrestrained rage, the volcanic eruption they likely expected. He would instead become a still, silent observer, a collector of their deceit, meticulously gathering the pieces of their betrayal. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing his voice to remain deceptively level, the tremor of his inner turmoil carefully masked. So he began, his gaze sweeping slowly between their guilt-ridden faces. You two have been intimately involved. For months. He let the simple, damning words hang in the thick, humid air, watching their reactions with a detached, almost clinical interest. Sarah's guilt was a palpable weight, dragging her gaze to the cracked asphalt beneath her feet. Tony, however, seemed to be slowly regaining some semblance of his usual cocksure demeanor, a flicker of smugness, a subtle undercurrent of triumph, beginning to resurface beneath the veneer of forced remorse. Yeah, well, sometimes, Tony offered, shrugging with a practiced, almost theatrical nonchalance that grated on Michael's already frayed nerves. Sometimes these things just happen, man. You know how it is. Michael nodded slowly, deliberately, pretending to absorb this pathetic, dismissive excuse with a semblance of understanding. Right, he echoed, the single word laced with a sarcasm so thick it could be cut with a knife. He even managed a weak, humorless smile that didn't reach his eyes, a carefully crafted mask of bewildered resignation. Look, he continued, his tone shifting to one of weary exhaustion, it's late. I'm not thinking straight right now. Sarah, why don't you just come home with me? We can try to talk about this. Maybe try to understand. A fragile glimmer of hope flickered in Sarah's tear-swollen eyes, a desperate yearning for a return to the familiar comfort of their shared life. Oh, Michael, she began, her voice a choked whisper, reaching out a hesitant hand towards him. But Tony cut in smoothly, his arm instinctively snaking around Sarah's shoulders, pulling her possessively closer. Maybe Sarah should just stay here with me tonight, Mike. She's pretty shaken up, you know? We can just talk things through, try to figure out where we went wrong. The blatant possessiveness in his voice, the casual assumption of his newfound place in Sarah's life, was like a physical blow to Michael's already battered heart. He forced himself to maintain the carefully constructed facade of weary resignation. No, Tony, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. She's my fiancée. She's coming home with me. He turned his gaze directly to Sarah, his eyes unwavering, a silent plea for her to choose him, to salvage something from the wreckage. Come on, Sarah. Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting back and forth between Michael's imploring gaze and Tony's possessive grip, a silent battle raging within her. Finally, with a small, almost imperceptible nod towards Tony, a subtle signal of allegiance, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, maybe Tony's right, Michael. I need a little time. To process everything. The quiet rejection, the clear choosing of his betrayer over him, stung with a sharp, agonizing intensity, but Michael refused to let it show. All right, he said, his voice still flat, betraying none of the turmoil churning within him. But we will talk, Sarah. Tomorrow. One way or another. He turned to leave, his back a rigid line of wounded pride, but a sudden sharp thought pierced through the fog of his pain. He stopped, turning back to face them. Tony, he began, his eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed intently on his former best friend. You mentioned that this situation was complicated. What exactly did you mean by that, Tony? What makes this betrayal so much more than just a simple infidelity? Tony hesitated again, a flicker of unease, a brief crack in his carefully constructed facade of nonchalance crossing his face. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, avoiding Michael's direct gaze. Just, feelings, man. It's not like we planned any of this, okay? It just happened. Michael nodded slowly, deliberately, his mind racing, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place. He knew with a chilling certainty that resonated deep within his bones that they were lying. This wasn't just about stolen kisses and whispered affections. There was something else, something darker, something they were desperately trying to conceal. He subtly reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, feigning a casual check of the time. Look, he said, his voice casual, almost dismissive, I'm going to head out. It's been a long night. But I'll be in touch, Sarah. First thing tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss. As he turned and walked back towards his truck, his movements stiff and unnatural, he discreetly activated the voice recorder app on his phone, slipping the device back into his pocket, the small red dot on the screen a silent witness to their deceit. He started his engine, the rumble of the old truck a small act of defiance against the suffocating silence of the docks. As he drove away, the indelible image of Sarah and Tony locked in their illicit embrace remained burned into his retinas, a constant, agonizing reminder of their betrayal. But now a new emotion began to simmer beneath the surface of his pain, a cold, calculating determination. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't just about a broken heart. There was something else at play, a deeper, more sinister secret that they were desperately trying to protect. And he was going to find out exactly what it was. He would become a silent investigator, meticulously uncovering their lies, determined to expose the full extent of their deceit, no matter how painful the truth might be. A hard, almost clinical detachment settled over Michael in the days that followed, a fragile shield against the raw, gaping wound of his betrayal. The initial shock and fury had receded, replaced by a cold, methodical determination to uncover the full truth. He played the part of the wounded, bewildered fiancé with a chilling effectiveness. His voice tinged with a carefully modulated sadness during his brief phone calls with Sarah, a feigned willingness to understand the incomprehensible. He even agreed to a strained, awkward meeting with Tony at a neutral coffee shop, forcing a semblance of civility as he pretended to grapple with the complexities of their affair. All the while his phone, nestled discreetly in his jacket pocket, diligently recorded every carefully chosen word, every hesitant pause, every evasive glance. He became a meticulous listener, dissecting their carefully constructed narratives, searching for the inconsistencies, the subtle cracks in their carefully crafted facade of regret and confusion. Sarah clung stubbornly to the moment of weakness narrative, her tearful apologies sounding increasingly hollow and rehearsed, her explanations riddled with vague details and shifting timelines. Tony, emboldened by Sarah's continued presence at his apartment and Michael's seemingly passive acceptance of the situation, grew increasingly careless, dropping subtle, almost boastful hints about a significant opportunity that was finally within their grasp, a chance to escape the perceived limitations of their lives in Savannah. One sweltering afternoon, feigning a fragile step towards forgiveness, Michael suggested a peace summit, a final attempt to salvage their fractured relationship, at Tony's cramped, dimly lit apartment above the bar. He arrived armed with a hidden camera, cleverly disguised as a seemingly innocuous phone charger, its tiny lens a silent observer of their every interaction. As they talked, the carefully constructed wall of their lies began to crumble, revealing the far more sinister reality beneath. It wasn't just about stolen kisses and whispered affections in the dead of night. It was a calculated, cold-blooded conspiracy, a deliberate act of treachery that extended far beyond the realm of simple infidelity. He discovered, through their unguarded words and self-congratulatory pronouncements, the true nature of their significant opportunity. It involved Sarah's privileged access to sensitive information and valuable resources at St. Jude's Hospital, a vulnerability they intended to exploit for their own selfish gain. They spoke in hushed, excited tones about acquiring specific medical supplies, high-demand pharmaceuticals and specialized equipment, items that could be easily and lucratively sold on the black market. Tony, with his connections forged in the shadowy corners of Savannah's late-night bar scene, had already established a network of unscrupulous buyers eager to pay a hefty price for the stolen goods. Michael's meticulously planned romantic weekend getaway, the one he'd poured his heart into creating for Sarah, was not just a casualty of their affair. It was intended to serve as their perfect alibi, a convenient smokescreen to conceal their criminal activities. The depth of their betrayal twisted in Michael's gut, the agonizing heartbreak slowly morphing into a cold, incandescent fury, a burning desire for justice that eclipsed his personal pain. They hadn't just slept together. They had systematically plotted against him, exploiting his trust, his generosity, the very foundation of their shared life, as a shield for their illegal enterprise. He had heard enough. He had their confession, their detailed plan, their greedy motive, all meticulously documented in audio and high-definition video. He wouldn't confront them in a dramatic showdown, wouldn't give them the opportunity to weave another intricate web of lies. He would instead use their own words, their own arrogance, to bring their carefully constructed world crashing down around them. Over the next 48 hours, Michael became a ghost in his own life, his every action deliberate, his every interaction carefully calculated. He meticulously backed up the incriminating recordings onto multiple secure devices, ensuring the irrefutability of his evidence. He gathered any other potentially relevant information, scouring Sarah's discarded notes and Tony's carelessly left messages, piecing together the timeline of their conspiracy. He avoided all direct contact with Sarah and Tony, allowing them to bask in the false security of their perceived success, letting them believe their meticulously planned heist was still on schedule. The silence in his small apartment was deafening, broken only by the frantic, almost manic energy of his preparations, a strange, unsettling cocktail of fear, anticipation, and a grim sense of purpose churning within him. He knew the path he had chosen was fraught with its own risks, but the alternative, allowing their betrayal to go unpunished, to let them profit from their deceit, was simply unthinkable. On the night of their audacious plan, Michael found himself parked in the shadows of a deserted warehouse district a few blocks from St. Jude's Hospital, his aging Ford pickup an inconspicuous observer in the darkness. His phone, clutched tightly in his hand, vibrated with the low hum of the police dispatcher's voice, a constant, reassuring presence in the tense silence. He watched, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs as Tony's familiar blazer pulled into the dimly lit service entrance of the hospital, Sarah's slender figure a barely discernible shadow beside him. The air crackled with an almost unbearable tension. He saw them slip inside the building, their movements furtive and hurried, their figures disappearing into the darkness. He waited, each agonizing second stretching into an eternity, the distant wail of a siren a faint, almost mocking prelude to the events about to unfold. Then the unmistakable flashing blue and red lights appeared, silently cutting through the oppressive darkness, growing steadily brighter, the sirens now a piercing cry in the night. The carefully orchestrated takedown was swift and efficient, a testament to the detailed information Michael had provided. Sarah and Tony were apprehended inside the hospital's loading dock, surrounded by a substantial quantity of stolen medical supplies, their faces illuminated by the harsh glare of the police flashlights, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Michael watched from his hidden vantage point, a complex wave of conflicting emotions washing over him, a profound sadness for the future that would never be, a lingering ember of the love he had once felt for Sarah, a burning anger at their callous betrayal, and finally a heavy, almost weary sense of closure. He knew with a chilling certainty that their lives would never be the same. The consequences of their greed and deceit would be severe and long-lasting. The ensuing weeks were a disorienting blur of police interviews, Michael's calm, measured testimony contrasting sharply with the panicked denials and desperate fabrications offered by Sarah and Tony. The audio and video recordings proved to be irrefutable, their own words painting a damning portrait of their greed and calculated betrayal. The local news, initially titillated by the sordid tale of a love triangle gone wrong, quickly latched onto the more sensational aspects of the case: the planned hospital heist, the illicit black market connections, the shocking depth of their conspiracy. Michael found himself thrust into the unwanted spotlight, the reluctant victim of a scandal that had gripped the quiet city of Savannah. He politely declined the majority of interview requests, retreating into the familiar, comforting rhythm of his carpentry workshop. The scent of sawdust and the solid feel of wood beneath his hands offering a small measure of solace in the emotional wreckage. He knew the path to healing would be long and arduous, the scars of such profound betrayal running deeper than any physical wound. But he also carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had chosen the difficult path of justice, refusing to succumb to the base instincts of revenge, trusting instead in the unwavering hand of the law. Sarah and Tony, their faces pale and drawn, their initial bravado completely evaporated, faced a battery of serious charges: grand larceny, conspiracy, and a host of other felonies that carried the potential for significant prison time. Their carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of lies and deceit, had crumbled spectacularly. Michael, though still grappling with the raw ache of loss and the lingering sting of their treachery, began the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding his life, much like the intricate pieces of furniture he crafted with his own hands. Each carefully measured, cut, and precisely placed joint a testament to his resilience. He knew that trust, once shattered so completely, would be a fragile thing to reconstruct. He would learn to open his heart again, eventually, but the lessons learned in the shadows of the Savannah docks would forever remain etched in his memory, a stark reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the most seemingly familiar surfaces. The humid Savannah nights would still carry the cloying scent of magnolias and the salty tang of the waterfront, but now, for Michael, they would also carry the quiet, hard-won scent of justice served. A testament to his strength and his unwavering belief in doing what was right, even when it was the most painful path to choose. He had lost a future he had cherished, a love he had believed in, and a friendship he had held dear. But in its place, he had found a quiet dignity, a newfound strength, and a hard-earned understanding of the complexities of human nature, the capacity for both profound love and devastating betrayal that resided within the human heart. The whispers and the stares would eventually fade, the news stories would become old history, but the lessons he had learned in the crucible of his pain would remain, guiding him forward as he slowly, deliberately, began to build a new life from the ashes of the old. He would emerge from the darkness, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and ultimately free. The weight of their deceit was no longer his to carry. The law had spoken. Justice had been served. And Michael finally could begin to heal.